The UK government has yet more blood on its hands as 49-year-old council Binman Wayne Broadhurst, walking his dog in his local community in Uxbridge, is brutally stabbed to death, nearly along with two others as well, by a 22-year-old Afghan migrant who came here as a quote-unquote asylum seeker and was given leave to remain. Yet another incident of a terror attack perpetrated on the British people, sanctioned by their own government. I'm your friendly neighbourhood far-right thug George Creswell, and this is Voice of the Valleys. Hope we're all doing well, guys. Hope we're all having a fantastic morning, afternoon, evening, night, wherever we are. We're going to get straight into it today. Before we get into the story I just mentioned, I was recording this yesterday, Tuesday, the 28th of October to be precise, so some of these events have had several days to transpire in the aftermath, so we've got a bit more information to go off of now as well. It was an absolute stuttering and incoherent mess, so I thought better just to leave it for today. It just wasn't my day yesterday. That's a lovely sound, isn't it? Might not have heard it with the way that the audio's cleaned up and stuff like that. Leave it for then. Come back with a fresh head, or at least as fresh as it can be, with more information, luckily, and more things which I want to go over. First things first, however, it's the reason why I'm pushing this interview so hard at the moment, ladies and gentlemen. My recent sit-down with Justean Winter. This came up on my X feed recently. I'll bring it up on screen for you in a moment. In my opinion, if this is true, it very much so vindicates a lot of what Justean was saying. It very much vindicates a lot of what Justean was saying. This was a screenshot that I saw somebody had posted to X. It's from Reddit. But it's a very heartbreaking story if it is true. And it's one that we really should be taking notice of, because if it is in fact a true story, it's one that really speaks to the heart of a lot of topics that me and Justean talked about in that interview. That being the concept of rogue nurses and corrupt practices within the NHS. It's titled, this post, and I'll bring it up on screen for you in a moment. My father died in hospital because two nurses attending him could not communicate with each other or the doctor. Now, in that interview, ladies and gentlemen, I actually asked Justean outright, is there a link between immigration, mass immigration, asylum seekers, all of these other things, all of these other initiatives, and rogue nurses popping up in our hospitals? Obviously with asylum seekers and immigration and the lack of need to learn English and so on, and with the ways we've been told in Britain that we have to bend over backwards to accommodate people of foreign lands and foreign customs and foreign languages, that we need to change everything about our home to suit them, despite they are the guests here, who are running on borrowed time, a lot of them, but the way that the sentiment is changing, and has been changing for a long, long time. You're only seeing it now, ladies and gentlemen, because of how much more the ideas have become mainstream, because of how many more people have woken up to what's truly going on. But I asked Justean, was there a link between asylum seeking, immigration, all this stuff, and rogue nurses popping up in hospitals? She answered emphatically yes. It's very easy to see, ladies and gentlemen. And one of the things that employers will do, whether it's, whether so, I won't name any companies actually, right? You know the companies I'm talking about. The delivery companies that were profiting off of illegal labor, because it's essentially enables them to be able to pay dirt cheap wages, slave wages essentially, because people coming over from other places, when everything's being put up by the taxpayer, they don't need to pay them as much. They don't need to pay them as much. They can get away with working for a lot less, and the employers can get away with paying them a lot less. So as a result, they make more money. Well, the NHS is a business. So why would we think the practices would be any different? It's easy to see then why they would want to bring in these rogues, not give them even the most, basic of training, shove them in a uniform, allow them to wig swap and badge swap and all of these things in their little gated, or not the little gated communities, but in these little village communities they have for themselves, and go all up and down the country, potentially allowing them to work for a lot cheaper. All the while, your family members are suffering. There's been many cases that Justean has been brought to my attention, right, of patients suffering at the hands of these people. And sadly, this person in this post has lost their father, if it is a genuine post. I have reason to believe that it is true. from what I've been told. And Justean actually corroborated this, or hinted that there's a good chance that this is true and that we're going to see more of it as things continue, unless we really demand that authorities do something about it, ladies and gentlemen. I don't think that they're really going to. I think that they're going to obfuscate away from this as much as possible, as they always do. As they always do. They'll set up another branch, they'll say lessons learned, they'll say all this stuff, right? Now we need to push for true accountability. It's not going to come very easily. But this is the post. I'll bring it up on screen. My father died in hospital because the two nurses attending him could not communicate with each other or the doctor. My father died in hospital last week in England. Cause of death was a medication error. The two nurses who were looking after him were unable to communicate with each other. My father's best friend and I watched as they frantically bounced between English and other languages, 2 other languages to be precise. Neither one was capable of speaking proficient English. When a doctor rushed onto the floor, neither nurse could clearly tell the doctor which medication had been administered that caused the reaction. He pointed at a computer and asked them to bring the records up. From what I gather, neither nurse had bothered entering or finishing their records on the computer system. My father passed away in front of me and his best friend because of this medication error. It's been a week now, and the hospital still hasn't contacted me to apologise or offer an explanation for what they are doing about these two nurses. His best friend and I complained 2 days after he passed, and then they ask, is there any way I can get the police involved in this? Would it count as manslaughter in some way? I wouldn't bet on the police or any of the investigative authorities really doing anything. If I'm completely honest, I don't really see them, doing anything at least of note. But what you're seeing here, ladies and gentlemen, if this is in fact a genuine case, anybody that says that it's not important now, that nurses, that these staff, whoever they are, when they come from other areas of the world, that it's not important that they learn how to speak English, or at least how to communicate in the common language of the area that they are in, which in England should absolutely be English. No ifs, no buts. The clue is in the name of the country. It directly led to someone's death. So the next time somebody says that common language is not important, the next time you hear somebody, complaining or whatever, because they're hearing a bunch of foreign languages or whatever, just think this is what it could potentially be leading to in the most extremes of cases, in the most important environments that our loved ones and ourselves can end up in a lot of the time. Makes me think back to my time on intensive care very, very graciously that I got as lucky as I did. Because I was at a vulnerable time at that point in July of 2023, when my family were called in and told that there was a good chance that I would not survive a particular night when I came down with septic meningitis. I covered that in a past podcast episode, but I think it was on the other show that I did when I first started doing any kind of podcasting. Think to myself that I was very, very lucky indeed. I have people that have been in hospital since that nearly died because of medication negligence. One of them nearly got overdosed on codeine, for example. And when you see these things about records not being done, another thing we talked about in my interview with Justean, this is that interview, parts of that interview that we talked about, ladies and gentlemen, coming to life right before your eyes. So if you haven't gone, after you like and share this video and hit subscribe, follow on Rumble, all of this other stuff, wherever you're listening, whether it's Spotify, Amazon Music, whatever. After you do all that, after you do that good stuff, make sure you got notifications on and all this stuff, because the algorithm isn't great and I'm often getting demonetized, but you guys love to celebrate, right? And I find it funny, by the way. I'm putting those sarcastic posts up. I hope they come across like that. I find them funny. Please go and share that interview, because people need to know. People need to know that this is going on. They need to know that there's a lot of people in our hospitals that aren't who they claim to be. There's a lot of people in our hospitals that aren't who they claim to be. In fact, I'm going to bring it up a little bit quick if I can. I'm not sure if it will let me do this, because it's a different way of bringing things up than I otherwise would. I'm going to try and bring up the image in question, which I think is extremely important. So if you want a clear-cut example of this going on, ladies and gentlemen, you need look no further than this, and it should be coming up on screen for you now. This is the actual image that Justean sent me, right, prior to our first interview. And I put this up on X as well when I was talking about this stuff. A little spad, a little, not even argument, but like conversation I got into somebody on X when I pointed out that somebody was being very disingenuous about the boats arriving in Wales and so on. I got a bit more to go over with regards to that a little bit later on, ladies and gentlemen. Do stay tuned. But you're seeing here, ladies and gentlemen, this is Justean herself on the left. And the nurse she's taking a photo with is not who her badge would have her say she is. And you can see that clearly because the badge on the nurse on the right was quite clearly of African or some other kind of dark-skinned descent. See if I can zoom in just a little bit more and move it over a little bit. You can clearly see the badge on there, ladies and gentlemen, and this is in Glamorgan, mind you, is of a light-skinned nurse. The races are completely different, and you can even see that with the smudge on the badge itself. We all, obviously, need to be far more switched on with that than we are. I can promise you that, ladies and gentlemen. It could be your father. It could be your mother. It could be your sister. It could be anybody else who's close to you, you know? Please don't let it be them. I'm just getting the next things ready, ladies and gentlemen. That's why I'm not looking at the webcam. Please don't let it be them. Also, ladies and gentlemen, if you are a viewer of this show, if you, like people have in the past, and I haven't always had a most secure way to do it, this is sort of like the start of that, if you will. I'm not a cybersecurity expert, and I don't really have understanding of how other journalists, like, for example, James O'Keefe, do these things, and obviously he's American, so it's different. If you'd like to reach out with anything to the show, because I don't intend on stopping this, keep this going as long as I can, because I feel it's extremely important and fruitful work. I do, and I think you guys do as well. The making people more aware of what's going on and trying to, again, shift the perspective on things. It's why it's been, people go on about the Yanks and the way they do things, right? The independent media scene, the podcast scene that they have out there is extremely influential. And that's something we can absolutely take advantage of here, I think. And they slowly are gaining popularity in the UK. I think a lot of them. You look at Liam Tufts, he has quite a big audience. You look at Heretics with Andrew Gold, Modern Wisdom with Chris Williamson. You know, not all of them political by any means, but the talk shows, independent media is only going to be getting stronger as people become more and more disillusioned with legacy media, mainstream media for their reporting, because they've seen how politicized they are, they've seen how much they lie. And as a result, they'll start looking for alternative sources, which either are going to give them a different perspective on what's going on, or they feel are going to tell them the truth. And that's what I always aim to do. Am I biased in a particular direction? Yes. But I'm biased in a particular direction because I see that that's where the friggin' evidence is pointing and how much has been covered up in the name of narratives, in the name of politics, in the name of all of these things that's further lended credence to what they were saying. People on the right, you know, whether they just be true conservative, I don't mean conservatives in the Conservative Party, right? True conservative in value, right? Or even more to the further end of nationalist and whatever. They've been right about so many things when they were decried as all of these villains and used all of these labels and so on that stopped people from reporting serious atrocities that were then able to take place. The Britain being the premier one at the moment, which is in the media spotlight and in the public discourse spotlight for good reason. If you want to reach out to the show, whether it's to blow the whistle, whether it's to add further context to stories that we talk about that you think is important, right, or to give a tip on something that you maybe like me to follow up on, then there is an email address dedicated to that now, ladies and gentlemen. I put it in a recent post up on YouTube. I know a good few of you have seen it by the reactions on it. If you want to get in touch, if you want to bring anything forward, that you feel that would be important for me to know or talk about, you want to break silence on something, even if it's done so anonymously, you want to give, an anonymous tip of some kind, and head on over or use the email, all lowercase, votv.tips@proton.me. That is all lowercase, no spaces, obviously, anything like that. Pardon me. VOTV, for Voice of the Valleys, votv.tips@proton.me. That is votv.tips@proton.me. And you'll find it down below as well if you want to copy and paste it into your email sending service. Obviously, if you have any documents or whatever it is, like Justean sent me all of this stuff, right? I feel this would be a lot more secure than ways I've done it in the past when people have reached out to me, right? If there's anything you want me to follow up on, or you want to add more information to the stories that we talk about, then please use that. It'll be obviously completely anonymous and confidential, so I'm not going to share it or anything like that. Obviously, if you share information with me, I'll obviously share that on the show, but I won't share anything to do with who you are or anything like that. Obviously, that goes without saying. So if you want to reach out and contribute in that way, then please use that email, votv.tips@proton.me. On with the show, ladies and gentlemen. So, first part of that out of the way, because I feel that's important to get out of the way. Little side sort of topic, an important thing for you guys if you want to get involved, if you want to send me anything that you think would be important. His name, ladies and gentlemen, was Wayne Broadhurst, and he was a 49-year-old council binman who was walking his dog in his local community of Uxbridge before his life was tragically and brutally cut short by a 22-year-old Afghan migrant who was given leave to remain after, quote-unquote, seeking asylum in the UK a few years ago. In a terror attack, and I will call it a terror attack because every single one of these attacks on our people and in our nation is completely preventable, and the government has been complicit in it. Even if they say they're not treating it as a terror attack, I don't hold them with the credibility anymore to be able to make that determination. Every single one of these attacks is a terror attack against the British people, facilitated in many ways by the government. So all of them are terror attacks. If these people had not been here, which time and time again people have campaigned against, right? It would not have happened. The reality is that if Michael Adebolajo wasn't in this country, Lee Rigby would have survived at least that day. Obviously, he could have walked out into the middle of the road, been hit by a car in a freak accident, right? He wouldn't have been murdered in a terror attack with Michael Adebolajo citing his Quran verses in support of it. He wouldn't have been butchered in the middle of the street. We wouldn't have had the Manchester Arena attack if the terror attack, if the attackers weren't here, right? If we'd had better border control. 7/7, right? Southport, the Road of Britain, and so on. The cold, hard fact is that if these people weren't here, these events wouldn't have happened. Not to say that other atrocities wouldn't have happened, but these events would not have happened. That's why at this point, ladies and gentlemen, even if you live according to the recent census in 2021, I would hold it with a little bit of suspicion, if I'm completely honest, because a story coming up later on in the show, ladies and gentlemen, has shown that in North Wales, in Run-Up Yorworth's own constituency, there was recently an illegal immigration smuggling bust, which saw about 50 arrests. So again, it makes you wonder, this was the one that got caught. How many have slipped through the net with these open border, nation of sanctuary policies? How many have come through the boats at Dover? How many have come into this country legally, mind you? The brutal reality is that most of the people that were involved in the gang atrocities came here legally. That's the brutal reality. How many of them have infiltrated our communities? And we just haven't noticed. And it tells you a lot that even in areas like mine, which I'll give you an insight into it right now, ladies and gentlemen. If I quickly bring this up. my constituency in particular, and people are already noticing changes. They won't say it out loud. They'll say it in private circles and so on. Even people that heavily disagree with me for my political views, right? And think that I am an absolute, nutcase for noticing what's going on. Well, there's a lot of other nutcases in that case then, obviously. In my constituency, which I'm not going to name, it is very ethnically homogenous according to the last census, 97.8%. 97.8%. And talking about areas of England where obviously that is not the case, but talking about other areas as well. If not at least in support of people who we are landlocked with an open border with in England, if you are not pushing for remigration alongside those, then I would be questioning you massively. If you would not be objecting to nation of sanctuary or mass immigration and seeing the asylum seeker scam for what it is, I would be very, very concerned and questioning at this point. It's enabling a lot more of this. This could have been your father. This could have been your brother. This could have been your uncle. This could have been your grandfather. Could be your son. Right? If you're an older person watching this. It's completely preventable. Completely preventable. Here's Mark White with some of the details, who was reporting for GB News, coming up on screen in a moment, ladies and gentlemen. This was where that they confirmed, who I don't believe has been named yet, by the way, 22-year-old Afghan national was responsible for this heinous crime. Coming on screen now.
Well, sources now confirming to us that the suspect, the 22-year-old man who is in custody on suspicion of murder and attempted murder following this triple stabbing here, is an Afghan national. We're waiting to get more confirmation from the Home Office on his status in terms of whether he is an asylum seeker, someone who was here on the Afghan relocation scheme, what the situation of his status in the country is at the moment. But we can confirm that he is an Afghan national. I've just been speaking a short time ago, actually, to another eyewitness here, Ben James, who...
Can we really say that a 22-year-old Afghan national is an asylum seeker? If you want to know why that mere classification is problematic, ladies and gentlemen, go and listen to my... in fact, there's a recent clip on YouTube, I'll link it down below as well, that just came out of my conversation with John Carr. John Carr went out and spent time in Africa and Burundi, on the border of the Republic of the Congo, a very poor area, where he said the average salary is about $200 per year. And highlighted there, with all kinds of war that was going on at the time, what real refugee camps, what real refugees look like. Unsurprisingly, ladies and gentlemen, what do you think that he said that he saw? You saw women, you saw children, you saw families, right? Those are the things that you saw. You might see the odd man there that was, there with his family, making sure they were safe and so on. You did not see anything like 22-year-old men that are in good nick, right? They're in good physical nick, claiming to be refugees and asylum seekers. Those are the people you get to go fight the conflict, if anything. Sadly, because you never want any conflicts to go on. But those are the people who are the most able-bodied to go and fight it. Which makes it kind of funny, right, that Richard Gere, I believe it was, all the lefties were sharing this as if it was a major humanitarian thing, even though it was akin to the meme of the thin, very small, frail white girl and the 5 black guys that behind her, that classic, pornographic meme, right? You had these bunch of Africans, right? Not sure exactly where they were from, but again, using the term military-age man, so people who are likely at least over the age of, again, discounting the fact that, for example, our previous generations would lie about their age to go and fight in the war, right? So you have potentially even like 16 and 14-year-olds signing up and lying about their age to go and fight in the war, right? You're looking between sort of like 18 and probably the uppers that I saw, I'd say were around 30, probably, maybe not even that, right? Sometimes it's quite difficult to judge. But they're all young adult males. They're all young adult males. And they stood around this like older, frail white guy, and it honestly looks like a hostage video. That's what it looks like. And he's being like, oh, you know, you got to be all refugees welcome, campaigning on behalf of asylum seekers, this amazing humanitarian, right? It honestly looks like a hostage video. In fact, that's exactly what I said about it when I shared it. I'd strongly advise you to go and find it on my X page. It's the self-flagellation has to end because it's costing people their lives. The weakness has to end because it's costing people their lives. Just regular people. So a little bit of insight, ladies and gentlemen. The Telegraph released this. So this was in Uxbridge in West London. 49-year-old dog walker named locally as Wayne Broadhurst was well known in the community, was killed after he allegedly intervened to stop a 45-year-old man and a 14-year-old boy from being attacked. The Afghan national entered the UK clandestinely on a lorry in 2020 and was granted asylum and leave to remain in 2022. Who is cheering on? Because his name is going to be coming up later on in the show, ladies and gentlemen, as we talk about the successful deportation of Kebatu, right? Hadush Kebatu. Who is cheering on the Afghan resettlement scheme at this time, ladies and gentlemen? One Robert Jenrick, and who is, in fact, I was going to bring this up a lot later. But Jack Hadders, right? Jack Hadfield. So Jack Hadders is his at on X if you want to go and follow him, right? Does a lot of good stuff from what I've seen. Shared these news headlines, which I'll bring up on screen for you now, highlighting how many around this time and around the time that the Conservatives in particular were in power, right? Which is why, again, people on the right, why they are just as upset, just as angry, feeling just as betrayed by the Conservatives, right? For all the lefties throwing shit at the Conservatives, thinking the right, people on the right of politics are going to disagree with them. They'd be sorely mistaken because people know how much the Conservatives have betrayed them, right? We'll talk about that in my interview with John Carr as well, but the spineless Conservatives that often receive scorn in their communities now. Boris Johnson, Grant Shapps, Robert Jenrick, and Ben Wallace all saying how much they value these people coming into the country and how, in some ways, Grant Shapps, for example, would walk over hot coals to do it again. This is one of them. Boris Johnson promises to take in more Afghan refugees, right? Next one. Politics UK. New former Defence Secretary Grant Shapps, who ensured the super injunction on the Afghan data leak remained in place, says he would do the same thing again and walk over hot coals to save lives. Well, now, ladies and gentlemen, we have to walk over hot coals, or we potentially have to engage in some kind of conflict to save our homes and save our people. So thank you to the government, thank you to Mr. Shapps, for example, for showing that he's willing to walk over hot coals to bring these people here to do these heinous things that have no business doing here because they have a home to go to, right? And maybe we shouldn't have been with that home for as long as we did, right? Obviously, how many lies were told at the time? You can't, in a lot of ways, people who got duped by the propaganda at the time, you can't necessarily hold it against them. Now we're paying for it now, aren't we? They would walk over hot coals and do the same again. Ben Wallace, the Wallace Wave architect. We could not betray Afghan allies who fought alongside us. No surprise again if you listen to my interview with Tim Davis, ladies and gentlemen, link down below, if I remember. Ben Wallace was one of the big ones that oversaw at the time the big influx of DEI in the armed forces and in the RAF in particular we talked about with Tim. I makes no apology in this instance for applying to the court for an injunction. It was not a cover-up. Obviously, that's exactly what it was. And then Mr. Robert Jenrick, 4th of September, 2021. He's thinking, did he know about this guy? Welcoming Afghan refugees is a national project. We want to ensure long-term integration, which is a two-way street. Yeah, your two-way street, Jenrick, cost this 49-year-old man his life and cost his family a loved one. It's kind of funny, right? Not funny as in what happened, but now again, he's trying to be harsh on David Lammy, for example. Is where now I have to, begrudgingly, I don't want to, almost come to the defense of David Lammy because of how much, that's coming up later on in the show as well, because of how much the Conservatives have sullied their name. and have torn down what they once were and dragged their name through the mud. Right? Many would argue that Robert Jenrick and others, Kemi Badenoch and all of the others, Rishi Sunak, Boris Johnson, David Cameron, etc., were not the first ones to do it. Were not the first ones to bring the Conservatives into disrepute. Many would argue, obviously being at Winston Churchill's party, and many would argue that Winston Churchill is not the hero that many people regard him that he is. Right? Many people would say maybe the Conservatives have had a bad name even ever since World War II. And you could also make that case because both of the main parties in Britain have oversaw the invasion of Britain and the absolute destruction of the British Empire, which you could argue in many ways is completely preventable. And that goes for the monarchs as well. That goes for Queen Elizabeth II as well. And obviously that goes for Charles III as well. Rhodesia is a great example. Tragic story. Tragic story of betrayal of our own people to appease terrorists. But anyway, says here he was not believed to have been living in an asylum hotel or home office accommodation during the attack. There was rumour that he was in one of these HMOs, right? One of these local HMOs, right? Which now the plan for these people is now moving into another gear, where Keir Starmer is now saying he wants them out of these hotels, right? Because the tourism industry is taking a massive hit, right? With these hotels not being open, yes, they're being subsidised by the government, but they're not getting the same tourism now that they once were. Because people don't have these lovely 4-star hotels to stay in anymore. He's going to start moving them into military bases. Why? Why just, send them home? But obviously, no, they need their foreign voting bloc because of how much they've alienated the British people. But it's going to go from there, and then it's going to go into your communities. Where you think all of a sudden, because they're in your communities, they're going to change and they're just going to switch and they're going to be exactly the same wiring as you and me? No, of course they're not. No, of course they're not, because they don't have the same attachment to the land. They don't have the same attachment to the people. They don't have the same will and the same just innate calling to take care of it, because their ancestors didn't build it. They have no respect for it, or at least they wouldn't have as much respect for it. If they had respect for the people here and for the land, a lot of the things that we're seeing now wouldn't have happened. The Britain wouldn't have happened. They would understand that this is not an Islamic country, and as a result, they wouldn't be turning churches into mosques, even if no one used them. It's a choice. That's a choice to do that, and it's a deliberate choice. We don't have a good name as British, if you want to hear, and we all get grouped in with that. Welsh nationalists, Irish nationalists, etc., Scottish nationalists will all get grouped in with the same British in the eyes of the rest of the world. Right, because of the empire, right? Because we've been a union for a long time. We'll all get grouped in with the same, national identity, whether we like it or not. And in the eyes of the world, and in the eyes of a lot of people, the British do not have a good name. It's worth remembering that when we decide to throw open the doors, not thinking about what's going to come after. That's what the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and all of these years where the were going on, that they were being covered up and so on, were all about. A lot of it, in people's minds, was motivated by revenge and motivated by racial, religious supremacy and desire to colonize. We should remember that. We should remember that. We should remember that a lot of people around this world don't like us. It's been painfully evident with this incident and with all manner of other incidents. You go on and on and on. Now, as I said, ladies and gentlemen, this was not just, here's, God rest his soul. Here is Mr. Broadhurst, by the way, ladies and gentlemen. So as you can see, for the trouble of trying to save another person, a 45-year-old man who did suffer, I believe it was life-threatening or life-changing injuries, a 14-year-old who luckily did not suffer life-threatening and life-changing injuries, he paid with his life. He paid with his life in one of the most brutal ways I've ever seen, ladies and gentlemen, because the video's out there. I won't play it here, obviously. I did post it up on my X page recently, though, which the UK government has been trying to censor the out of it. Yeah, for all the talk they said they were just going to talk about, or they were just going to try and, make sure kids don't get access to pornography or whatever it is. You see very quickly how it was used then to censor news and footage of this attack, right? Which I didn't want to post it. I didn't want to post it, admittedly, because it's not pleasant. It's not good, obviously. And this is a man's final moments, a family man's final moments. But the report that came out from the British police said that the individual sadly died. I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen, he did not just sadly die, he was brutally murdered. He was brutally murdered and stabbed, no less, mind you, because I counted them. I counted them, including the initial stab when he was on his feet before he just got butchered when he was laid on his back on the ground, trying to defend himself. No less, because sometimes the video shifts and you can't actually see what's happening on the camera. No less than 13 times. No less than 13 times. The guy is raining the knife down like a 12-6 elbow in a lot of them. And you can see he's actually doing it, you know, it's not just a frantic attack and whatever else. Like it is. It's like a bear, right? It's like a bear attack. But he actually takes time at some points to look for ways to get beyond his arms. He doesn't just keep raining them down against like the guard of his arms. No, he's actually looking for ways to surpass it. It's quite clinical in many ways. Some may even say practiced. Obviously, I'm not saying that that's an actual thing that happened. It's an actual allegation, obviously. Completely preventable. And even if they say, ladies and gentlemen, that it's not being treated as a terror attack, we should treat it as such. Because this is part of a campaign of terror that our government has waged against us. That's how we should be interpreting it. Government told us a lot of things, right, that weren't true. And they say that they're not treating something as terror, right? I believe they said in the aftermath of Southport initially that they were not treating it as a terror incident. We should be treating them as terror incidents. Every single one of them. Because it's part of a campaign of terror. And our government is at the helm of that, vessel. However, one thing that was good to see, ladies and gentlemen, is that I'm just going to have a look for something else a bit quick as well, just to check something, because it's gotten to the point now where we need to actually look for these things. Let's try that one, because some of these constituencies have multiple different ways of saying it. Multiple different areas that come under the same name. It does appear that Uxbridge, in many instances, Uxbridge in many ways, for example, Uxbridge West is very close to white minoritization. It's at 52.2%. So as I mentioned, ladies and gentlemen, before I had to go deal with something there, you would have seen a slight jump cut. Uxbridge West, for example, 52.2%. Very close to what appears to be native minoritization. And also the one right next to it as well, which is Uxbridge, Central and Brunel. Obviously, I'm not from these areas, so I'm not really sure how to classify, but it all comes under the broader banner of Uxbridge, is 52.7. So again, we, kind of at the point where, again, dare we notice a pattern? The broader constituency of Hillingdon is already at a minority status of 48.2%. And I don't see the government slowing down in this regard, because it's not in their best interests to. A lot of knocks at the door. Sorry, ladies and gentlemen, it's got to the point now where, you hear that little knock at the door and you think, who is it, Is it my time? Is it my time in Soviet Britain? But thankfully, the good people, it seems, of Uxbridge did indeed come out to pay their respects. I love that people have, seen that one of my posts on Restore Britain, sorry, it says legalize pepper spray, and I said you spelt guns. Does seem to be being received quite well. So a lot of times I get quite poor reach on posts. So yeah, it's good to see it for 11 views. So many people have liked it. It's very good. It's very, very good. It shows that people realize what they actually need to ensure their safety. But this is from a vigil, it appears, that was held for Mr. Broadhurst in his local community. Sure that this goes to show how loved he really was, how appreciated he was. It's quite a large turnout, ladies and gentlemen. So it's on what appears to be not a council estate road, but just like a regular little residential road going through a housing community. And there's a lot of people. There's a lot of people here that have turned out for it, which is very, very good to see. And funny, he could see how appreciated he was, and how much his memory will be held in high regard. This is the moment, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, just so you can see what happened. Police turned up. After this incident, he had a knife-wielding Afghani, young Afghani male, roaming the streets of Uxbridge, having just butchered a man in the middle of the street. Many people having celebrated that, by the way, and that's not a new concept. I'll bring this here now as well, ladies and gentlemen. I was going to talk about this afterwards. What happened recently? In fact, I'll play this one first. Do you remember that girl that we talked about before, Lola, who was a young girl, 12-year-old girl, who was groomed and assaulted, and I believe then beheaded by I believe it was a foreign female. I can't remember where exactly she was from. But in usual pattern, ladies and gentlemen, of people celebrating Mr. Broadhurst's death, in the aftermath of this heinous incident that happened in France, the one that the dad died of grief, and we covered that before. As you can imagine, ladies and gentlemen, Antifa goons turned up to a vigil that people were trying to hold for her, and they were luckily fought off by members of an organisation what appears to be called La Cocarde, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, who managed to avert a larger tragedy, right, by fighting off these, far-left invertebrate thugs. However, in the true spirit of things with Charlie Kirk, in the true spirit of things with Irina Zarutska, they did manage to, and did not forget, to destroy a portrait of Lola as they left. Here's that video for you.
Allez, go!
Disgusting people. Absolutely disgusting people. I'm not sure which group is which in this one, ladies and gentlemen. Can only assume, at the very least, that the person throwing the firelighter, or the person throwing the flare, rather, it wasn't a firelighter, it was a flare, appears to be the Antifa group, because they're the ones that appear to have face coverings on, and their hoods up and everything. Although I could be wrong, but you can see there's these masked goons, all in black, again, roaming the streets at a vigil for a 12-year-old girl who was not only murdered, but then beheaded, and the father then died of grief. And this was a vigil that was held for her. And it was attacked by these disgusting. Can you even call them human? Can you even call them human? It's truly disgusting, and well done to the people that were there, that did their best to repel what was going on. But as I mentioned here, ladies and gentlemen, bringing this up on screen for you now, here is the moment that the assailant of Mr. Broadhurst was apprehended. For those of you not watching but listening, he's walking down the street. Police cars have just gone past at a very fast clip. From what I understand, the police response time was very good, from what I understand. They're coming here with tasers here. He's got his arms out, but he, as we'll talk about later on in a minute, as we got the eyewitness account as well, he refused to drop his weapon, and then he was tased, which I believe, I'm not sure if it'll be on camera here. There we go. He's just gone down. And then he was arrested. Some may say tasing him and taking him into custody was too nice, was too nice. But here's the, you heard Mark White mention that he'd spoke to somebody on scene who'd actually seen it earlier. And in fact, if you have a look at this still, ladies and gentlemen, before I play the video, this tent in the background was where the incident happened, as far as I'm aware. And many people were sharing this image online and celebrating the murder of this 49-year-old man again, who was just out walking his dog and was a valued member of the community and a treasured community servant, from what I understand, a binman, on the council. There's no words to describe how depraved some people have gotten, ladies and gentlemen. I think what's going on at the moment with all of these things, with the evil that's just rampaging throughout the world, it has driven a lot of people mad. It has driven a lot of people mad. It's driving people there. Make no mistake about it. Do your best to stay strong in your convictions, ladies and gentlemen, and keep a cool head as much as you can. I find it extremely difficult. If you look at my X feed, you'll establish that very quickly. I find it very difficult. Do what you can to keep a cool head as much as you can. Again, the last thing we want, think about, do you make the best decisions? Do you make the best decisions when you're in a fit of rage and when you're emotional? No, of course not. But here's that eyewitness report for you, ladies and gentlemen. I believe it's Mr. Paul O'Brien is going to be speaking in a moment.
Paul O'Brien, who's a local resident here in Midhurst Gardens. Thank you very much for speaking to us live on GB News. You saw what happened here. Just talk us through it, please, Paul.
Yeah, so I was coming back just from the local shops around here, and I see some people running sort of from this direction of the scene towards me in a bit of a panic. So I then come round to the road where I could just hear commotion, but couldn't quite put my, what was going on.
Just this roadway right
Just
here?
this road here, yeah. And then I could hear a distance, sort of like a wow of many sirens, and just felt something was on, something was off. I then see two police cars, one unmarked, one marked, come really fast down here. They sped down there, jumped out. And then I saw them direct someone. They was shouting at them to drop their weapon. They were saying, "Armed police, drop your weapon." And the guy had his arms up, but he was walking backwards, so towards me, with his back towards me down this
and
road.
Could you see the weapon?
Yeah, in his right hands. He had it held up, quite a big weapon. I'd say about that big, I guess, from distance. And yeah, he was backing towards me. The police just kept shouting very loudly, "Armed police, drop your weapon, drop your weapon." And he didn't. So they tasered him, and he fell down onto my right here. Just on the pavement, where he stayed, really. I think he had some medical attention, but there was just complete chaos around here. There was,
So yeah, some may say that it was a bit too kind, but you can go and check out the rest of that clip if you want, ladies and gentlemen. So again, you can imagine what it was like for the residents of the local community as well, for people seeing this. Can you imagine you walk out of your house? Because this just seems like a regular nice English neighbourhood, you'd think, right? And you walk out of your house and you see a young Afghani man stabbing this, middle-aged, 49-year-old man who's just out there walking his dog, right? Like a bear on top of like Leo DiCaprio in The Revenant, right? Let's make it, a Hollywood comparison, but see this, defenseless middle-aged man being subject to this disgusting attack by somebody who really had no business being in this country, who our politicians will lie about and just say this just as English, or just as British rather, because obviously I'm not English, just as British as you and me. The ancestry of the people in these lands that go back thousands of years don't matter. Taking in America, for example, people who've been there for now hundreds and hundreds of years, or some are still on stolen land, but the quote-unquote asylum seeker or whatever it is, the quote-unquote refugee who got there 10 minutes ago is just as American, right? Is more American than the people who've lived there hundreds of years. See the con that's taking place. This is where no human being is illegal. This is where refugees welcome. Again, if they were honest about it, they'd say foreign voting bloc wanted, foreign voting bloc welcome on their banners. That's what they would say if they were honest about it. This is where it gets you. And we've seen it time and time and time again. How many more do we have to see? That's the question. Biggest thing is our government, whether it's the British government as a whole or individual governments, the Scottish government, the Welsh government, Irish government, etc., they don't care how many it takes to fulfill their aims. Every single one of our lives are expendable in their eyes because they'll just replace us from people who'll come in and just live off the state. If they can keep a bare minimum of people to essentially keep in serfdom to be able to just about keep this system going, they'll keep that. Oh, I tried to move my microphone out of the way slightly, but it ended up tipping over. There we go. But ultimately, they don't care for any of our lives, ladies and gentlemen. You could make the argument, have they ever really cared? Have they ever really cared? They did, at this point, they wouldn't be pushing this suicidally empathetic, open borders, very, very destructive agenda. We know that they don't care about us. They care about appeasing the people that they are accountable to. And they are people far above any of our heads, ladies and gentlemen. They're people far above any of them. The Larry Finks, the George Soroses of the world, the UN, all of these other people, all of these other organizations, right? These non-governmental organizations, to this massive global cabal that, at least in my opinion, really do need to be destroyed. Abolished, dismantled. Because they are the ones at the helm of this ship that's destroying all of our countries and all of us in the name of this globalist agenda. This, one world government communist order. We just have to do our best to resist, ladies and gentlemen. This is the fight of our very lives. If you want to know how complicit our politicians are, ladies and gentlemen, dear Run-Up Yorworth, the leader of Plaid Cymru, his constituency of, Anglesey, is it Holyhead Port of Anglesey, right, has recently been in the news because, if I move that over there, just another news story popped up I want to go over a little bit later. An illegal immigration and smuggling blitz that sees 50 arrests has just occurred there. How interesting is that? There's no such thing as illegal immigration, as such. That's what he said, as quoting from an interview that I gave, believe, with the BBC. We see no borders where we see suffering. Let us not ask, where are you from? Let us ask what we can do to help. At least seems to change his tune when it's his own constituency, when it's his own people, at least that he still has to keep a veneer that he is relatively accountable to. Funny how this whole thing about open borders, about no human is illegal, but there's no such thing as illegal immigration per se, completely falls apart, seemingly when it's his own constituency. So reporting from the BBC, 3 Romanians with previous immigration offences were returned. Thought we saw no borders. I thought we saw no borders. I thought no human was illegal. I thought there's no such thing as illegal immigration. After trying to enter through Holyhead Port last week. A 3-day operation targeting the UK's common travel area, through which British and Irish citizens can pass freely, led to 51 arrests of suspected immigration offenders and smugglers. At this port, ladies and gentlemen, this year alone, there have been more than 220 immigration cases so far this year. of which 177 people were refused entry and removed, including these 3 Romanians who were forced to leave their cars behind. How evil. How are we going to be, chanting against this fascistic action? How dare you? How dare you remove them? Seeing the hypocrisy of the left yet, ladies and gentlemen? Seeing how they don't really care about their ideas, they're just doing whatever their higher-ups tell them to do and whatever they think is going to make them appear virtuous? Right? More than 220 immigration cases so far this year alone. Now, I don't imagine there's going to be too many more before this year is out now, given we've progressed through most of it. But for those who say that because the boats aren't landing at Wales that illegal immigration is not a problem, can you not at least see that we do still have problems? And that this is something that we absolutely should be caring about, right? A Romanian driver who arrived from Dublin was arrested for knowingly breaching a deportation order. Why we should be caring and what's happening in other places of the world, even if we have water borders between them, let alone just a landlocked no-border system, right? Which is what we've got with England and Scotland, by extension of coming through England, right? Literally, think about it, ladies and gentlemen. You can drive from Cardiff to Edinburgh in a single day with a car, right? On a single tank of fuel, even. You can get from one end of the country, which is unheard of outside of the, you go back even, not even 100 years, that likely would have been unheard of, with the technology that was available at the time and how limited access that technology was in relative capacity. You can now make it from Cardiff to Edinburgh in like 8 hours. 9 hours if you do it in, one straight stretch. I say you should do that. But in less than a day, you can be from one end of the country to the other. In just a matter of hours, you could be from Dover to St. David's. So that's why we should be concerned. Not to mention those who are coming in through our ports directly into our country. That's why we should absolutely be concerned. That's why I was up on the bridge with the activists last week. This affects all of us. This affects all of us because they're all being brought in for the same reason. Companies are going to benefit from them because they can pay them a lot cheaper and price natives out, right? And they're not able to find gainful employment, which, say what you want, because then it'll mark them out of the housing ladder, right? It'll mark them out of the housing market, put them out of the housing market. That is a de facto form of birth control, ladies and gentlemen. Because even if you're married, even if you're hyper-religious or whatever, you want to have a very large family, if you can't have shelter, that's not going to happen. So by bringing in this cheap slave labor, which is what it is, the left has always been a fan of slavery. Ladies and gentlemen, the left has always been a fan of slavery. What do you think? The people who were deporting, people who Trump are deporting in America, they're now saying, well, who's going to do all the jobs that Americans don't want to do? A lot of them want to do them. It's just companies in this instance, the corporate side of things, don't want to pay the Americans the wages. They'd rather import a bunch of cheap slave labor. Right? And it's funny that the Democrats were obviously the ones that made up the Confederate forces, the pro-slavery forces. They were the Democrats at the time. They were always on the left. They were always on the left. It was the Republicans that made the Emancipation Proclamation. So obviously companies will benefit from it. And then the globalists will benefit from it because they get to control the native populace a lot more. They get to make sure it continues on its negative trajectory, and that's entwined in with a bunch of other ideologies, feminism, birth control in the form of the pill and all manner of other things, right? Encouraging all the sexual degeneracy, right? All of this other stuff, right? Subsidizing in many ways to get access to obviously kids to indoctrinate them through schools, subsidizing single motherhood, removing father from the home, essentially having the government take over the role of what the father used to be. It's all an element of birth control and overall control of the population. And obviously then as well, ladies and gentlemen, they put these in your communities, they give them the right to vote, and your vote matters less, because now you all need to take from the same vote share. If you imagine it, if you have a cake and you have to split it between 4 people, right, each of you have a set amount of cake, and it's quite a large amount of cake, it's 25%, right? Well, how about if you were to split it between 8 people? You all have the one same cake. You all have the one same guy that you elect, or guy or gal that you elect. But now, you bring in more people, all of those other votes that were there before matter less. And as a result then, your politicians, when it gets to a certain amount, they won't care about catering to you anymore. They'll only care about catering to the ones that they care about that are going to fulfill their political aims. And you'll be stuck with a one-party or two-party system forever. And at that point, it's the reason people call it democracy a sham, democracy a scam. Because especially with the first past the post voting system being what it is, that in Caerphilly, for example, they're now being represented on the council by somebody who had a minority of the overall vote. That, can you argue it's anything but? With the way that it's being implemented? I'm not even saying that as a way to say democracy is a bad thing. That's not actually the argument that I'm making. But I'm saying the way it's been implemented, if you ask somebody what democracy is and then you explain them in this way, the way that it's being implemented, they say, no, that's not democracy. It's a usurpation of democracy. It's using democracy to get rid of democracy is what it is. And you should absolutely take care of that, ladies and gentlemen, because what people are realizing now, with no ability to bear arms, with no ability to do anything else, democracy, the ballot, is all they have. If that becomes meaningless, what agency do they have to be able to change political outcomes? They don't have one. They don't have one. At that point, you're a slave. In many ways, you could say we've been slaves anyway. But it's quite fitting, seemingly, how run up your worth, Mr. There's no such thing as illegal immigration as such. Mr. We see no borders where we see suffering. Mr. We're committed to be a nation of sanctuary. Mr. Oh yeah, let's put an Asian lady with a burqa on, right, as a front and centre as our political campaign ad, and then put some Welsh text next to it saying, Wales, it's us, when we have nothing to do with that. It's completely foreign culture. Funny how things seem to change when it's his own constituency, ladies and gentlemen. Funny how things seem to change. Now, this is something troubling that's broken over the last couple of days as well, and we need to discuss it. Because I've mentioned time and time again, for all the people that accuse me of saying you only care about when they're brown or whatever, that's a comment that I had the other day. And conveniently, the comment exchange that we had on that video, it's one of the clips that I uploaded to YouTube fairly recently, a couple of days ago, talking about what's going on in Ireland at the moment, in outside the City West Hotel when that 10-year-old girl got assaulted by somebody who was she was in state care and got assaulted by one of these, again, asylum seekers who was due for deportation, mind you. Somebody said you only care about when they're brown. I said it's categorically untrue. Funnily enough, ladies and gentlemen, the podcast before, I was talking about Ian Watkins, one of the most heinous paedophiles of all time, from a place that's fairly close to me, right? You know, I say pretty much everywhere in Wales is fairly close to me because everything, you know, a lot of the big cities and whatever else, a lot of the places that people can actually name are fairly close. And you say, like, anything within about sort of an hour, 2 hours, you say is fairly close. We literally say it's just down the road, right? And then obviously within that, for not the first time I've discussed it, is the disgusting case involving the police, seemingly, mind you, of Avril and Peter Griffiths, right? Who were dubbed the Fred and Rose West of Barry. Fred and Rose West of Barry. That's what they were dubbed as for their disgusting crimes. And it's quite funny that we had this little exchange on the comment section, which is no longer available now. I'm assuming it's because they deleted their comment, and I think it deletes mine as well in that instance. Where I said it's categorically untrue. I do care about it when it happens in any instance. The reason why there's so much focus on non-native, on native instances of this is because of how much it's been covered up and how many victims there are. It's a magnitude crime unlike anything we've seen in recent memory. It's like the atrocities of what happened in East Germany with their women as the Red Army pillaged through on steroids over not just that time frame at the end of the war, right? And obviously throughout the entire Soviet Union anyway, but it's like those atrocities dialed up to 11 and then repeated time and time again with government covering up for nearly a century. There's no comparison. There's no comparison. And obviously councils are complicit, police are complicit, all levels of government are complicit. It's not just England. We've got cases in Scotland. We've got cases in Wales. There's cases of these gangs operating all over the UK. But I don't just care about them when the perpetrator is of a different skin colour than myself or is not of the people of these lands. And that's why this is another tragic case of something that's happened, which the left have jumped all over. And I want to explain why, when these things happen, it's tragic when they do. And that goes without saying. But it does help sometimes to view things with a bit of skepticism for the way that the left tend to represent these things. How many of your MPs, how many of your representatives have been all over this case at the moment, where a British man named John Ashby, 32, from Stockland Green, has been charged with which occurred on Tuesday evening, and was also charged with assault, strangulation, racially aggravated actual bodily harm, and robbery, because he attacked a woman in her 20s in the Parkwall area of Walsall. I believe, from what I've been told, the woman is of Pakistani descent. And apparently it's been racially aggravated because it's been reported he used certain racial slurs or whatever during this heinous attack. Right? Which is never justified. Never, ever justified. But how many MPs, you're seeing such a really strong in-group preference with this now, right? And there's everything that they accuse us of as well that they are guilty of. It's just the reality. Nadia Whittam, Zara Sultana, all manner of others have jumped all over this like flies on shit, right? To politicize it. To politicize it. Where was that response for the generations of British girls, right? Where was that response for the generations of British girls that have endured unimaginable torment as a result of racially motivated violence? In fact, not directly related to this case, ladies and gentlemen, but one of the grooming gang survivors, Ellie Reynolds, was at an event with Nigel Farage recently. And they were going on about the TV adverts, the Sarah poaching remarks on the TV adverts, right? And how the media has been up in arms, all manner of people have been up in arms over this racist comments and whatever else it is. We covered them before. If you want to go back to the previous episode and listen to those. We covered all those. And her message to the press in particular, it could be related to what's been going on. Why have you spent decades ignoring white girls being raped because of their race and in the name of racial and religious supremacy? This is that clip for you, ladies and gentlemen, highlighting the hypocrisy of everything that's going on. And you can say this, mind you, while still acknowledging that what happened to this poor woman who got in the park, right, by this disgusting person, right? We've got to take our own trash out as well, obviously. The hypocrisy of it. In many ways, the hypocrisy of it all. You can still acknowledge that. You can still acknowledge the hypocrisy of it all and condemn this disgusting act that took place.
Okay.
Can I comment on that?
Yeah,
as well?
please do.
I find it quite, overwhelming as well that every single one of these medias has said something about a comment that was made by Sarah, which is understandable, absolutely fine. Yet it's taken medias decades to recognise grooming gangs that are coming over and our children because they're white. That is also racially motivated, and it is racist.
Completely right. Completely right. So much of it has been ignored for so long. But yet when it does appear to have happened the other way around, the media, particularly left-wing politicians, and those on the right as well, and everybody rightfully so, should be condemning this. But it shows the difference in response. That so many of our girls, hundreds of thousands, hundreds of thousands, if not millions, was sacrificed on this altar of multiculturalism. The minute it appears to be an incident the other way around, there's a full court press on it. Where was the full court press for our girls? Where was the SAS going in and like they did with the mosque, not the mosque attack, the synagogue attack, when they sent the SAS in, right? And now apparently they've deployed the SAS, right, to monitor the Remembrance Day events, right, which I spoke about on the last episode. Remembrance events that are at threat of being cancelled. Where were the SAS to rescue those girls? Police wouldn't do it. The police wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot barge pole. Right? And in fact, they arrested fathers that tried to go and do it. They arrested the young victims. They persecuted the young victims. Not just in many instances with reports coming out that many police officers seem to them themselves and also work hand in hand with the gangs. But in the one case of the young girl where she was found half naked, plied with, drugs and alcohol and all manner of things after having whatever unspeakable atrocities happen at the hands of about 7 Pakistani men that were in this residence, they arrested the young girl for being drunk and disorderly. Where was the MP response? Where was the unequivocal condemnation there? No, people were called racist. People were attacked for it. People were called Islamophobic. Families still in hiding in many ways under threat of these gangs because they still roam free in many of these communities. Still not been dealt with and still going on today. Think of it this way, ladies and gentlemen. As you're watching this right now, wherever you are, in Britain, there is likely, at this very moment in time, one of our young girls somewhere, multiple of our young girls even, being subjected to these atrocities. It is still happening. Locked in one of these dens, being used as a human-sized sex toy. A human-sized punching bag, a fleshy punching bag. As property, seen as less than an animal. That's going on right now. And our government refuses to deal with it. Can understand people's justifiably angry response when in the aftermath of this tragedy they point out that this has been going on for our young girls for generations. An excerpt which is making the rounds on social media at the moment, which I have also shared, which I think would be important to go over, is testimony from one of the survivors, I believe. I'm not sure exactly where this is from. I'm going to read you this now, ladies and gentlemen. If you're on YouTube, because I've seen that it's impacting my rating when I attempt to get monetized and stuff like that, you might see a lot more of these being, having certain phrases, certain words or whatever bleeped out from now on. I don't seem to have the same problem on other platforms like Spotify and Rumble and stuff like that. So if you want to get the full unedited stuff, maybe it'd be worth going over to those platforms. But as a teenager, quoting now, I was taken to various houses and flats above takeaways in the north of England to be beaten, tortured, and raped over 100 times. Pardon me. I was called a white slag, and white appears to be this censored word there, as they beat me. They made it clear that because I was a non-Muslim and not a virgin, and because I didn't dress quote-unquote modestly, they believe I deserve to be quote-unquote punished. They said I had to quote obey, unquote, or be beaten. Fear of being killed and threats to my parents' lives made it impossible for me to escape for about a year, and the police did not help me. Because these people have no honour, ladies and gentlemen. These disgusting people that have come over from these other areas of the world where honour is a distant, unheard of concept, they'll go after your family and they don't spend, 2 seconds thinking about it. So it's even a difference. There's even a difference between organised criminals in areas like ours and in areas like some areas of Europe, particularly with regards to the Western La Cosa Nostra. Not the case of Sicilian mafia, for example, which don't have the same code of honour it seems, and they will go after your family. One thing that often seems to ring about these organizations, particularly those, for example, the most prominent one is the American La Cosa Nostra example. As far as I'm aware, at least, if you were to be a member of one of their organizations, one of their families, and you broke the rules and your name was put out there as a hit, to be hit, right? They would then, aside from a few psychos that were in there, they wouldn't go after your family. It would be off limits. That's why they called it. La Cosa Nostra translates, ladies and gentlemen, to this thing of ours. That's what it translates to. And they understand that the family itself has nothing to do with that. Now, at a certain age, you might bring your son into the organization and so on. That's how it was continued down the line, right? Nepotism, essentially. But if you were to be killed, you could at least somewhat rest assured that your family was not going to be harmed afterwards, aside from some of these, there's one or two psychos in every place, right? Not the case with these people. They'll happily go after and threaten and kill your family and do unspeakable atrocities to them. They'll happily do it. We are not the same. We're not the same people, ladies and gentlemen. It's as simple as that. We don't have the same values. We don't have the same wiring, right? We are not the same. And opening our homes to these people was the biggest betrayal and biggest mistake we ever made, biggest betrayal our government ever conducted. It's complete, unarguable fact at this point. Because we were doing perfectly fine before that. We had the world at our fingertips before that, as British. This, by the way, I posted this in response to Mothin Ali, who had the gall on October the 27th, so 2 days ago, to complain and bemoan racists are now using racists are now more emboldened to use as a weapon of intimidation, without any hint of irony, without any hint of shame, or whatever other term you will use. Here's the post in question, ladies and gentlemen, that I responded to. Bringing it up on screen for you now. Mothin Ali, Green councillor, right, who was involved in the riots he was photographed throwing rocks at the riots, so the Romani gypsies, from what I remember, when the police went up there. I can't remember the name of the place. It escapes me at the moment. It's not Hillsdale. It's not Hillsborough. It's something like that. Put it down in the comments. You know the incident I'm on about, the infamous incident where the police were running away. Racists are now more emboldened to use as a weapon of intimidation. This is now the second racially aggravated in a matter of months following other racialized attacks, including one at a synagogue in Manchester, the mosque in Peacehaven. The mosque in Peacehaven, with quite strong evidence, it would seem, that it was a foreign-on-foreign, Muslim-on-Muslim affair. Without any hint of irony, without any shame, I repeat for you, ladies and gentlemen, I was taken to various houses and flats above takeaways in the north of England to be beaten, tortured, and over 100 times. One person. Over 100 times. I was called a white slag and white as they beat me. Because I was not a virgin, because I was a non-Muslim, because I didn't dress quote-unquote modestly, that I deserved to be punished. We're not the same. Nonetheless, this is an extremely tragic incident. Extremely tragic incident, and I hope, obviously, the person responsible, what was his name? John Ashby, faces the full brunt of the law. Obviously. Obviously, and any good person would. Any good person would. However, one thing that would be important to consider, ladies and gentlemen, in many ways, the way that we react when things like this happen, ladies and gentlemen, is telling for a lot of people. And one incident happened. I believe somebody tried to claim that this was at a Tommy Robinson rally, but I don't actually believe that it was. This was at a Protect Our Women rally in Hull. And a lady, I'm not sure exactly how old she was, but she's not very old. I'd say she's a few years younger than me. Got up on stage, and it is a really, really bad look, this video. It has to be addressed, and we should not shy away from addressing things like this, ladies and gentlemen, because we should not necessarily pretend that all of our people are good, and we do not have bad people within our midst that are of our people. Because we do. Obviously, we're talking about one right now. But there was a survivor of grooming that was actually essentially dragged off a stage at a Protect Our Women rally for saying that her abusers and lecturing the crowd on this were white men, not immigrants. And we should absolutely care about these people also. Should obviously care about all victims of abuse, all victims of abuse. Child and adult. We should all care about all victims. That goes without saying. This then looks really, really bad when you have things like this, ladies and gentlemen. Check out this video coming on screen for you now.
I am a victim of grooming. I was groomed when I was 11 years old, and I am disgusted with all of you here. I'm disgusted with all of you because it was not an immigrant. It was multiple.
So you can see how quickly there, ladies and gentlemen, it descended, and people from the crowd actually were yelling at her to f off and all manner of things, right? Now, whether this was to be included in the, subject of the protest or whatever, I don't know. But if we are going to be advocates for protecting women from protecting children from grooming, you can indeed then not push a survivor of grooming off of that stage, right? And let them say their story, because their stories also deserve to be heard. Now, the point is, ladies and gentlemen, one anecdotal case like this does not then mean that the opposite is not true. It does not mean that we should not take into account the opposite as well. Are the people in that crowd bad people for wanting to stop the systematic of their own women and girls by foreigners? No. Is it then good when a person then gets up on stage to give their story, right? And because it doesn't quite fit a particular narrative, or because it's an example that is a different perpetrator, should they then be pushed off stage and have their voice silenced or whatever? I don't believe so. I don't believe so. I think it would have looked a lot better on these people and on the people protesting if they would have let her speak. And this is where, again, when it's politicized in many ways, it's the victims that suffer. This is what happens when you let the atrocities go on for as long as they did, and how angry people have been made to feel because of the injustice that has been done. But you have other examples, mind you. This happened to someone as well who indeed has not taken the same track and understands the problem. In my opinion, a great example of that is Sydney Jones. Right, I believe she goes by Journo Jones on X, who was also groomed. She's open about her story now. She gave her account at a recent event. I can't remember if it was Tommy Robinson's event or whatever, but she was groomed by a family member from a very, very young age. Right? But it's an example now of somebody that can, again, see the distinct problem in light of the specific experience that they had. And someone now, because of their experiences, this young girl who I empathize with her tremendously, and I hope a perpetrator, whoever it is, was subject to justice, was subject to harsh justice, right? But does it mean that the people campaigning to keep women and children safe from predatory foreigners are wrong? No. So again, to pretend that people in this country, young girls in this country, have not been groomed by people of this country and of this land would be, it would be suicidal. Be suicidal from a political perspective, but it's also horrendously immoral. Because then you're, again, throwing people out that have a story, that want to get their abuse out there, that want to be open about, their abuse story, in the hope that justice would be done. And then when it doesn't fit your political narrative, you throw them to the curb. It's not a good thing to do. It's not a good thing to do, because we should want justice in all cases. However, one thing you'll know, ladies and gentlemen, and I know this is quite a long, convoluted section, is this. The left love to run with these things when it happens, right? And it happens, the left love to run with these things. And why, when these incidents happen now, especially when things come out instantly, as you know, when it is on specific communities, they'll treat things as terror attacks, they'll treat things as whatever. When it's against British communities, they won't. Right? There was an incident that happened where a Sikh lady and a bunch of Sikhs came out in protest because it was alleged that a Sikh lady was raped by two white men who were shouting deportation and remigration talking points. And it appeared then, ladies and gentlemen, that was later on, it seems that way at least, to be false. So James Goddard ended up posting this on X, and you can acknowledge this even if you disagree with a lot of what these people say. Some of the clips I just saw, some of the clips I just showed you, and the stories told you, are being massively shared by people whom I disagree with on pretty much everything, I would imagine, especially like immigration policy and all manner of other things. Right? But nonetheless, something is true, it ought to be said. Right? If something is genuinely true. But when this story broke, and there was these groups of Sikhs going out, essentially in very similar ways that we saw the groups of Muslims going out after the unrest in the aftermath of Southport. It later came out, the wording of the story, and I'll bring up the BBC article in a moment, there was an attack that, according to this, the force, as in the police force that were investigating, previously described as racially motivated, implying, it seems, that they were no longer treating it as a racially motivated attack. And that would be a stake in the heart of the claim that the left went to run with, that it was a racially motivated attack against immigrants, and they were shouting remigration and mass deportation talking points. So, in an article titled, Police Given More Time to Question Pair Over... Police have been given more time to question a man and a woman arrested in connection with of a Sikh woman, an attack that the force previously described as racially motivated. Here's that article for you. You can see it there in the top line. Police have been given more time to question a man and a woman arrested in connection with the of a Sikh woman, an attack the force previously described as racially motivated. Protests and vigils were sparked after the attack on the woman aged in her 20s in September in Oldbury in West Midlands. A 49-year-old man and a 65-year-old woman were also arrested in connection with the in Halesowen, is that how you say it? Halesowen, on Thursday, which police said was not racially aggravated. Now, it would appear, at least, that in the case now involving the Pakistani lady, at least according to, again, the report from West Midlands Police, right, of the man being charged with the Walsall, John Ashby, has been charged with racially aggravated actual bodily harm. Now, if it was a racially motivated attack, I don't know why they just don't charge him with racially motivated assault, because it's not actually the assault that seems to be racially motivated, right? Racially aggravated actual bodily harm. Now, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not equipped enough to tackle the difference between these terms. If you happen to have more of a standing in this than I do, feel free to comment down below or reach out using the email address I described earlier on in the episode, right? Those who are wondering, votv.tips@proton.me. If you want to reach out with more information on this, if you want to clarify this for me. But again, it's an example. I like to use this phrase. I used it in my fitness practice quite often because you see a lot of emphatic, claims being made on social media, right, about fitness or nutrition, whatever. But most people just need to worry about being active, eating relatively healthy, and getting in the gym and training hard, right? That's pretty much what most people just need to focus on. And staying active throughout the day as best as possible. A lie can make its way around the world before the truth has even finished lacing up its boots. And this was an incident where I'm not saying that people were lying. I'm saying that, again, they took something, instantly assumed that it was racially motivated or whatever, and ran with it. Absolutely ran with it. And later on then appeared to not be true. And that can cost people their lives because that can ruin people's lives. That can ruin just the lives of regular good people. Because to be labelled a racist in today's society, along with all of these other labels, is to essentially be given a death sentence. And you will be convicted in the court of public opinion. Many of us, even just for simply having remotely conservative views, will already be convicted in the court of public opinion anyway. It's not something you necessarily need to worry about. But truth matters. Truth matters. Because then dishonesty, or rather when the truth doesn't make it to surface, leads to either violence or leads to greater atrocity, right? Dishonesty in the face of the grooming gangs led to the scale of the atrocity that's been perpetuated against young girls. Dishonesty, in the case, for example, of Bailey McLaren, has led to him and his family having to go into hiding under threat of death, right? Lack of courage as well, obviously, to poke your head up and talk about these things. I'm aware, right, with the way that I've tried to do this, I'd probably take flack from both sides. But ultimately it's truth that matters. So what, this person, simply because they're not from here or whatever, this 20-something-year-old lady that was by John Ashby, she didn't deserve that. She didn't deserve that. It's absolutely heinous that happens. It's a stain on us. It's a stain on us as a people and a stain on us as a nation that happened. Right? And a lot of people won't want to touch it then for that reason, either because it's politically inconvenient or whatever. But truth absolutely matters and justice absolutely matters. Guess what? You can be for remigration, mass deportations, all of these things, and still acknowledge that it was wrong and heinous that this crime took place against this lady, regardless of where she's from. Because obviously we then, rightfully so, would be incandescent with rage, and obviously we have been, when it happens to our people. And it happens to our people so much. Ultimately, the biggest thing we want is just for this all to stop. But tensions are only going to get worse. It does appear that tensions are only going to get worse. Because as many people are rightfully saying, in my opinion, and not even rightfully in the case of making a moral judgment, but just in the case of a factual statement, Many people now, especially in areas where they've already been taken over and they've already been subject to colonization and so on, it is remigration or it is replacement. And that is true. That is going to be true, unfortunately. But you can still push for that and not downplay atrocities like what happened in the case of this young woman. But again, be cautious. Wait for more information to come out about these things. Because the left love this. Many people on the right love to do it as well. The instant something happens, they run with it. The instant something happens, they run with it. But the pattern of people being correct about these things at this point, from what I can see, exists solely on the right, pretty much. There's no pattern of this stuff that the left can point to. Because it wasn't systematic gangs of white British men that were going on preying on, young Pakistani Muslim girls in these gangs, right? Across generations. At least there's no evidence for that on the scale of what we've seen of Pakistani and other descendants of similar countries in that region preying on young British girls because they were white, because they were British, and because they were non-Muslim. Okay, so that was quite a heavy section. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope it came across, because it's quite controversial to talk about, that all manner of these atrocities are to be condemned, obviously. All manner of these atrocities are to be condemned. And that whilst we still can, even though for many instances remigration is going to be too kind for some, I think for people that sadly have, come into this country on a system that was an illegal system that the government was never allowed to do, and sadly they're going to be subject to the consequences of that as well, is that we should aim to resolve these problems as peacefully as possible. That's why I would say to many people, especially those who, make no mistake, the public perception is changing. The public perception is changing because we see that we are on course for elimination and our government wants us eliminated, and we have nobody to count on but ourselves. And that our government, to do this to us, is using people from outside as political tools and as human shields, essentially. As weapons to prey on our emotions, to prey on our empathy. I would strongly advise many, especially if you just happen to have got into this country recently, as many I see quite a few people thinking about doing this now, but especially in areas like England at the moment, I would strongly think about leaving. I would strongly think about leaving. Because people are very angry. And rightfully so. Because what happened, ladies and gentlemen, in the aftermath of this incident happening where the Sikh woman got attacked, again, it was told that it was white people, white British people shouting remigration and mass deportation slogans. Now appears that that wasn't true. It wasn't a racially motivated attack. The aftermath of this incident in Walsall, people then tried to compare it to what happened to the young girls in Scotland. Right? The incident of the young girl Lola, I believe it was, being arrested for defending herself against the gypsy gangster, as he called himself. I've forgotten his name. I don't commit people's names like that to memory. But to try and compare the two, ladies and gentlemen, to try and group that in with the suffering of generations of British girls, I think is absolutely disgusting. People were posting that, ladies and gentlemen, posting comparisons to what was going on with those two girls, not even a day after there was a grooming gang revealed to be operating in that area. A Romanian one, no less. Grooming gang jailed for 10 women. And these are the people in question, ladies and gentlemen. If you remember, the incident with Lola and the girls and the gypsy gangster happened in Dundee. These were also operating in Dundee. So we have here from left to right, Alexandra Bugonea, and then bottom left, sorry, Catalin Dobra, Christian Ulateanu, top right, Remus Stan, bottom right, and then finally the ringleader, Marian Companesio, or however you say it. I'm not very good at Romanian names, obviously. A Romanian gang led by a winking, smirking pimp have been jailed for abusing 10 women in flats across Dundee. Same place that Lola and the young girls were defending themselves in from the gypsy gangster. Right. 4 men and 1 woman plied their victims, aged between 16 and 30, with drugs at various properties between 2021 and 2022. And all in all the garbage, again, you could argue that is nowhere near long enough. You could argue that there's nowhere near any sentence that would be long enough, especially for the main people involved. The ringleader got 24 years, another one of them got 20, another one 12, another one 10, and the lady in question got 8 years. And no surprise, they deflected and minimized the offending against vulnerable victims by offering them an unending supply of mostly free crack cocaine. You exacerbated their vulnerabilities and proceeded to exploit them for your own gratification, in some instances for financial gain. No doubt you assumed, rightly, for some time that the drug-related lifestyles of the women meant that you were not reported or detected. And they also used, mind you, the vulnerability of the women to try and attack their credibility. So you can see here those who were attacking Lola in the aftermath of that incident, and saying that, oh, look, it's another incident of the natives getting violent with immigrants and so on. Completely vindicated. Completely vindicated, as she always was anyway. And you should really be thinking about, if you know, as I've seen many people did, ladies and gentlemen, those who were saying such things about Lola and so on, should really, really be viewing them with a lot of scrutiny. I think there's been a lot of deleted social media posts since then, but there is a Sky News report on this incident, which I'll bring up on screen for you now, ladies and gentlemen. Again, one case in many, 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 many generations of such cases and similar cases. There's no comparison. There is absolutely no comparison.
Another grooming gang, another city. This time Dundee, where there is revulsion. Driving the streets, they trapped 10 troubled local women as young as 16. Violated, manipulated and conned, thinking they were girlfriends of their Romanian abusers. Plied with crack cocaine before being blackmailed into sex.
This case was particularly shocking because the victims were hand-picked because of their vulnerabilities. The criminals were prowling the streets of Dundee looking for women who matched the conditions that they knew would make them particularly vulnerable, and then off the back of that exploited them on a sustained and brutal basis.
And these are the predators, arrested by detectives investigating sex trafficking of foreign women to work as prostitutes. There was a video on the ringleader's phone showing a victim climbing a tree, this threatening to leave her there because she didn't make money.
They're deplorable. They've had no thought as to the impact this is having on the victims. It's been quite controlled in that they knew what they were doing. You know, the fact that they're trying to get them onto controlled drugs has helped them keep control of the females and kept them coming back for more.
Official.
So you go and check out the rest of that video if you want, ladies and gentlemen. Absolutely vindicated. Absolutely vindicated. There's just no words, is there? There's just absolutely no words. Every time an incident like this, and every time any incident of grooming, all incidences of it happening, whether it's adult victims, whether it's child victims, right, is disgusting. Is disgusting and should be punished to the fullest extent of the law. Obviously, in many instances, people would argue the laws are not strong enough. You can make a case for that. Absolutely. But to argue that the treatment and what you're seeing going on at the moment with what appear to be isolated cases now at the moment, and if you have any more cases of this stuff going on, let me know. I'm yet unaware of gangs of white men, for example, white British people, going around preying on vulnerable foreign children, plying them with drugs, saying all of the things that were said to them in the grooming gangs excerpts, what happened to our girls, right? And then the police were covering up, the police were getting involved, the police were feeding the girls back to the gangs and so on. And they were doing it for racial and religious reasons, and the communities themselves covered it up. I've yet to see that. I've yet to see that go the opposite way. Anybody, I think, making that comparison is doing every single one of those victims a massive disservice. And in many instances, with how angry people are, they're only going to further the scorn on those cases. They're only going to further the scorn against those people that actually have suffered, and wrongfully so, because you're trying to make a completely false comparison. We can all condemn, right? We can all condemn any kind of violence, particularly when it's done in a systematic manner, and when it's done for racial and religious reasons. When it's done for any reason, it really doesn't matter. When it's done for any reason, we can all condemn that, and obviously any good person would. And guess what? You can do that no matter who the perpetrator is and no matter who the victim is, and still push for remigration, which I think is going to be absolutely necessary. Especially for many areas of England that we know of that have been completely taken over, ethnically cleansed and colonised, and desperately need to be liberated. Speaking of liberated, ladies and gentlemen, as we get on to these last couple of stories now, these last couple of clips, I'm aware this episode has been quite long. Mr. Hadush Kebatu, ladies and gentlemen, has actually been deported from the country. Tremendous news. Tremendous news that this migrant sex offender, that a woman assaulted a 14-year-old girl in Epping, right? I believe not even 2 weeks after he arrived in the country, has been, after, mind you, issuing a threat to disrupt his deportation, has been given £500 in an insult to the British people, but at the very least, he's now gone. He has been deported from the country. After, mind you, being mistakenly released from prison, given a £500 payment after threatening to disrupt his deportation from the UK to Ethiopia. And obviously that £500 is probably going to go quite far out there. As you know, he was jailed after assaulting a 14-year-old girl and a woman while living in an asylum hotel in Epping, Essex, what spawned all the flash protests outside the hotel. But was mistakenly freed by prison staff on Friday. Makes you wonder how mistakenly it actually was. After 2 days, was rearrested. And finally, he was put on a flight the Tuesday night, which landed in the following morning. So sadly, who did indeed extract more money yet again from the UK taxpayer. But at the very least, for likely approximately a few weeks, maybe a few months, because again, you have people being removed on the one in, one out scheme that are now trying to do everything they can to come back in. As you can imagine, right? They'll try and game the system for as much as they can. Let's hope this is the last we see of him, but I wouldn't count on it. But nonetheless, he has been deported, which is important for some of the clips which we're going to be bringing up. Now, ladies and gentlemen, speaking of one Mr. Robert Jenrick, we brought him up earlier on in the episode, ladies and gentlemen. And he tried to take, for example, David Lammy to task over Hadush Kebatu. This was on the 27th. Obviously, then news of his deportation did come. He asked, and we'll play this exchange, even though it's slightly outdated now, if David Lammy would resign if Kebatu wasn't deported by the end of the week. And Lammy told him to grow up. This is what our political discourse in the highest parliamentary office in the land, mind you, right, in the halls of our parliament, has devolved to.
To Secretary give the House his cast iron assurance that this man will be deported from our country by the end of the week, as he promised on the news on Sunday. And if he fails, will he take responsibility and resign? And lastly, on Tuesday, the Justice Secretary blocked my amendment to release the migrant crime data. Does he now finally acknowledge that there is a link between the small boats and crime in this country? And will he call the small boats out for what they are, a national security emergency?
It's not just national insurance, a national security emergency. It's an invasion. Let's call it what it is. It's an invasion, right? But you see that this is what we've devolved to. Obviously, the left very keen to call on people to resign for the ever so slightest of infractions, right? And when it's called on them to resign for, again, mistakenly, quote-unquote mistakenly, releasing an Ethiopian child sex offender, right, into just the public to do whatever the hell he wanted, right, Robert Jenrick is told to grow up. But this is not a point in Jenrick's favour, ladies and gentlemen. No, I've spoken about some of the good things Jenrick appears to have done, but it's good to, again, be reminded, so to speak, that it does seem that he is still being part of the Conservatives warrants enough suspicion, ladies and gentlemen. Just appears to be a little bit stronger in his rhetoric, whether it's because he's simply giving the veneer that he actually cares about these things, I don't know. But Lammy fired back, it seems. Whether this was before or after the previous exchange, I do not know. But Lammy fired back. And he wasn't holding back when he listed other that were released under the previous Conservative government, highlighting that there was no independent investigation done then. I don't know whether they were calls to resign at that time. I have no idea. I imagine that they were. And he says, here he comes, and he has the brass neck to give the impression that this started 14 months ago. And I kind of hate to say it, but it's possible in this instance that the cervic would... I lost my... You know that thing when you're about to land the punchline of a joke and you stutter? Because it's been nearly 2 hours of just constant talking. On about 3 hours sleep. Anyway... This is where, very sadly, it appears, the cervix whisperer Lammy might have a point.
Violence went up in our prisons. Self-harm went up in our prisons. Drug abuse went up in our prisons. And prison officer numbers were cut under his watch. And he comes here and has the brass neck to give the impression that this started just 14 months ago. Let me just pause there. William Fernandez was released in error in March 2021. He was a sex predator. He raped a 16-year-old and assaulted another young woman after he was let out by prison in 2021. Was there an independent investigation? No, not from their side. Rayan Nubi, released in error in March 2023. Again, a man who was mistaken released from a Category B prison. Was there an independent investigation under his watch? No, there wasn't. Laura Matavoulis, again released in error in December 2021. Was there any independent investigation? None at all. And he comes here with the brass neck. I've asked Lino.
So there you go. He's just rattling them off. He's bringing the, name machine gun, so to speak. Or I suppose not, more rather name semi-automatic rifle. It's not quite machine gun pace. But if what he says is true, he has a point. And this is where no person on the actual right of politics is going to come into the defense of the Conservatives on these issues. Because people, I spoke about this with John Carr as well, expected this from Labour. What people have got, they expected it from Labour. The difference was people hoped and expected the Conservatives would do something about the issues, and they didn't. They did the exact opposite of what they were supposed to do. That's why, in many ways, the name of the Conservatives is in worse standing than Labour, right? Among pretty much everybody. The left hates them because of ideological divide, and they're on the opposite side of politics anyway, partisan politics, right? They're going to hate them no matter what, right? And now the right hates them because, look, we elected you, right? This is what people on the right think. We elected you to solve these problems, and you did the exact opposite. In many instances, lecturing us as all of the same ways the left did, right? In all the same ways the liberals and the outright leftists and communists did. You betrayed us. And there's nothing quite like that feeling of scorn and feeling of anger when you've been fooled, when you've been betrayed. There's no feeling quite like that, ladies and gentlemen. It hurts quite unlike anything else when you feel you've been betrayed. That's what many people feel with regards to the Conservatives. Rightfully so. Rightfully so. Because they did betray their electorate. They did betray the British people and Britain as a whole in the biggest way that we've ever seen in recent memory. And these people now, the British people now, seeing how much they've been taken for fools and see how much has been taken away from them, A, they're not going to take it lying down anymore. And B, they're not going to forget. And they're not in a very forgiving mood either. They're not in a very forgiving mood. Personally, as a measure of collapsing the two-party system, which I don't see as happening with a change in the voting system anyway, because first past the post is a terrible voting system in and of itself, I would personally want to see the Conservatives and Labour completely collapse. Because I don't think, many of them. You go back 100 years and you get the leaders of like the Conservatives and Labour to look at their parties now, I think they would be in abject horror, what they've turned into. And rightfully so. But to not give too much credit to Mr. Lammy, ladies and gentlemen, because make no mistake, he's not our friend. None of these people are our friends. On both sides of the aisle, it seems there's very, very few that actually seem to have a backbone and actually seem to want to do the best for the British people. So Robert Jenrick, and this is a very short clip, but it's very telling, questioned Mr. Lammy again about Kebatu's accidental release before he was deported. The response from the Labour front bench, including the lady next to Lammy, and the guy on the other side of him, was to openly laugh, point, and jeer. Now, you could make the argument that he's just laughing and trying to, point shade and humiliate his political opponent, his political rival. But it's more than that, ladies and gentlemen, when you look at the case. He's laughing in the face of the family. He's laughing in the face of the victims. He's laughing in the face of the taxpayers. He's laughing in the face of the entire British public. This is a very telling moment of exactly what they think of these issues, and exactly what they think of you, exactly what they think of your daughters, exactly what they think of your communities. Because if they actually cared, they wouldn't ever be flooding your communities with these people. They're importing voters, and it has to stop. All the while, they're laughing at you as they do so.
On Wednesday, well, look, they may be laughing, but let me finish this point. On Wednesday, well, look, they may be laughing, but let me finish this point.
I let it play twice because I really wanted it to sit in, ladies and gentlemen. I really wanted it to stick in the memory. Let this image, if you're looking on screen right now, sit in your brain for a little while. Let it sit, let it stay there. You know the French Revolution, ladies and gentlemen, when people were sick and tired of being taken for fools by the monarchy? This is where we are in a very similar position, ladies and gentlemen. And obviously the French Revolution was absolutely horrible. Yeah, let this one sit in your brain for a little bit as well. So you can see just what kind of disgusting traitor we're dealing with on the far side of David Lammy, on his right-hand side, the left of the screen as you're looking at it. You expect it in many ways. You expect it from foreigners that you wouldn't expect to have the kind of loyalty, the same kind of compatriotism, the same kind of joined ancestry and joined camaraderie that you have with your fellow countrymen and women in your communities. These are our elected representatives. These are the people that these are the people that are put there to represent us. Or their constituents, rather. Not me specifically, their constituents. And this could be any one of their constituents because they want this through every little town and hamlet, not just every city, but every little town and hamlet throughout the country. Because they want to import votes to replace every single constituency and ensure re-election every single time so they can keep the illusion of democracy going. And they're going to laugh in your face as they do so. As they erode every freedom, as they take away every privilege, you not able to do anything against it, as they descend you more and more into tyranny, they're going to laugh at you and cash their fat checks whilst they do so. You thought you hated communists enough, ladies and gentlemen. You really don't. Just when you thought you did, you don't. It's just over 2 hours, so that'll do it for today. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Hopefully this will be out later on today. Hope we found it useful. Hope you enjoyed it. The bit that I found hardest to articulate was that bit in the middle. It's a little bit of a political miasma. I do feel so we have to hold our mirror up to ourselves. It's a key point that I talked about in the review of The Last Girl, which is up for members if you want to go and look at the full video. There's many clips of it coming out every now and again, so you can go and check those out as well. There'll be one clip of it coming out now on Halloween, my little Halloween treat for you all. But yeah, holding the mirror up to ourselves is going to be a big thing for us to do, not only in the heinous things that happen in our society that are perpetrated by our people, but then also, if you happen to be on the other side of the political divide, maybe holding that mirror up to yourself and realizing, again, whether you realize it or not, exactly what you're complicit in. And I don't mean to say that you're just as accountable as the worst people that have done the worst atrocities against Britain and the British people. I'm not saying that, but via your support of those things, via your support of those initiatives. And I would urge you to come on over before it's too late. And that'll do it for today. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Hope you have a fantastic morning, afternoon, evening, night, wherever you are. I hope you enjoyed it. Hope you found it useful. Like I said, if you want to reach out to the show, then get on over to votv.tips at proton, that's PROTON.me. Use that if you want to reach out in a secure email to blow the whistle on something or to add more information to stories that we talk about so that I can cover them, so that the biggest thing is the truth may always emerge. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Greatly appreciate it. I hope to hear and speak with you again very soon. Diolch yn fawr. Thank you for watching. Pawel fawr. We'll see you next time. You take care now. Godspeed.